who's the CEO of Innova Schools, and Sandy Speicher, who heads the education practice at IDEO. But before we get started and talk about Innova Schools, I'd like to give you a little background on the country where we've started this project, which is Peru. Peru is located in South America, in the middle of the West Coast. We have Ecuador and Colombia as our neighbors to the north, Brazil to the east, and Bolivia and Chile to the south. This is the image that everybody knows about Peru. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's Machu Picchu. We're very proud of it, but we also have the jungle. We have Lake Titicaca. We have amazing things to discover. But what a lot of people don't know is that we are a real powerhouse in a lot of different things in the world. We're number 2 in copper, number 2 in silver, in zinc, in gold. Next time you go to the supermarket or you order online, check your produce. Most likely part of it came from Peru. We're the leading exporter of asparagus, organic bananas, avocado, more recently blueberries and grapes. We're also the top exporter in fish meal, which is very important for feedstock, for poultry, etc. We have a very young and diverse population, and believe me, we have young boys as well, but 60% of our population is 30 years or younger. And we also have recently been getting a lot of attention for having 3 of the top 50 restaurants in the world. So if you have a chance to visit, you'll really enjoy eating out in Peru. As a result of all these good things, our country has been growing very, very fast in the last 25 years. Here's a chart over the last 11 or so years, where Peru has been the fastest growing economy in South America. And as a result of this fast growth, poverty has gone down from 51% to now 22%, while our per capita income has gone from a poor country to a middle income country. So that's all the good news that we have in Peru, and we have another 25 years to go if you want to become a developed country. Economists say that it takes 40 to 50 years, growing at 5%. Singapore did it in 40 years, growing at close to 7%. Korea did it in 50 years, growing at 5%. So we're halfway there. But this is our biggest challenge, education. In the year 2000, we were last in the PISA rankings. We were 41 out of 41. My father was always an optimist, and he'd always tell me, there's no downside, there's only upside from here, right? We were already last. In 2015, we weren't last because more countries joined the PISA rankings. But if you look at our region, we're near the bottom. We've gone from 2012 to 2015. As you know, this test the results come out every 3 years. We're still way below where we'd like to be. This is a typical public school in Peru. So sometimes I hear people complaining about the US public school system. I just don't understand why they do that. This is what we have to start with. This school, if I didn't tell you it was a school, you'd probably think it was a jail. You have, iron gates, dark windows, kind of like you don't want people to know what's going on inside, and perhaps you don't want the students to look outside. This is why kids don't really want to go to school. And as a result of these public schools, all sorts of new private schools have flourished in the last few years. We have, I think, close to 25,000 private schools and about 100,000+ public schools. And these are some of these fantastic private schools that have been flourishing all over Peru. I don't know if you can see it, but this is the Bill Gates School. You see kind of like the Windows logo there. Obviously, Microsoft has nothing to do with it, nor does Bill Gates. This is not part of his foundation. But this is what they do to attract kids. And I'm sure they thought that would be a high-tech, equivalent. For those that didn't want this, you also have the Harvard School. I've also talked to Harvard, and they've promised that they have nothing to do with this. And those that maybe like the West Coast can go to Stanford. And we have all the Ivies, we have Einstein School, and honestly, when we started looking at education in Peru, and Jorge and I would visit with some of these schools, there was one visit that was really our aha moment, and that was this school similar to the one I'm showing you here, where the person who is hosting us kind of figured out that we weren't really parents with 2 kids trying to look into their schools, and she was ready to kick us out. And before she kicked us out, we asked her if we could please have one last question, and she said, okay. And that question was, why did you decide to do a school? And her response really surprised us. She said, because it's more profitable than a Chinese restaurant. Now, I have nothing against Chinese restaurants, and they're all over Peru, and many times we go eat there, but this is kind of the level of commitment that we had in education in Peru. So we decided, let's do something about it. Let's see if we can get involved from the private sector. And we came up with a model that we called IDEO on, and we said we wanted to build a school network that had these 4 characteristics. The first one, affordable. By affordable to us, it means affordable to the emerging middle class. That's about $100 to $150 a month. Academic excellence, we wanted a school that could move the needle, where kids could actually learn something, they could go on to other education, perhaps be trained to get a job and do something with life, teach them to be lifelong learners. Third is we wanted to do a project that was scalable. This was a feel-good project, but not just one school. We wanted to do hundreds of schools. And why not think about crossing borders? Why just Peru? Why not the rest of the region? Why not other parts of the world? Because we see problems everywhere. And the fourth, and this is perhaps the most controversial when we started, is we need these schools to be profitable. We need them to be profitable so they can be scalable, so they can be excellent, so they can be affordable, so we can keep building new schools and not just get stuck with 1 or 2 schools. Many times we see really, really interesting projects that kind of stopped because the funding ends or the foundation decided to do something else. We wanted to fend for ourselves and hopefully replicate this model over and over. And this is one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about for-profit, this concept about shared value that Professor Michael Porter from Harvard always talks about. You know, not all profit is equal. Profits involving a social purpose represent a higher form of capitalism. And by shared value is coming up with projects that are good for your consumers, in this case, the students, the parents, also the teachers, and very good for your stakeholders, the community. If you can do that, I think you have a very viable project. And I really believe that the role of business is to try to take on the toughest problems in society and try to come up with solutions for them. What we'd like to do now is get into the nitty-gritty of Innova by talking about a little bit about the model, our journey, and what is the grand vision. So let me join the panel and pass it over to Sandy, who's going to talk to us about the model.
Thanks, Carlos. Hi, everyone. Actually, sometimes a video can share faster than we can what the details of the experience are, so we're just going to start with a quick video about Innova Schools model. So a few years, Carlos Rodriguez Pastor gave us a call, and he said, I'm looking to transform my country by designing a new education system. And part of the brief was to make sure that these schools would be international quality, that they would be affordable for the emerging middle class, and they would be scalable to disrupt the country's education system. Part of our design process was to make sure that we understood the people that we were designing for so that we could design a model that was right for them. What we learned was that students really wish to have their imaginations engaged.
Todo colegio tradicional, el profesor llega a clases, te dicta y tú copias. Acá no, acá el profesor llega a clases, te explica más a fondo y aprendes.
Nosotros somos un eje importante, pero no somos el eje principal. Los chicos son los protagonistas.
From the design of the building to the use of how the curriculum is structured, to how the students interact during the day, they rethought everything from the ground up.
There are 2 different modes of learning. The first is group learning. Group learning is more teacher-led, it's more project-based, and we took a constructivist approach to learning and codified it so that teachers can teach in a different way than they were used to. The other mode is solo learning, and there it's more self-directed. We're leveraging the best of the international tools available, bringing in different technologies so that students can gain basic subject matter concepts. Over the past 6 years, Innova has grown to 41 schools, serving 33,000 students. They're on track to have 70 schools by 2020. Student academic performance has been impressive. In reading, national measures have shown that 88% of Innova students are on grade level, compared to 61% in other private schools. In math, 61% are on grade level versus the national average of 25%. So I hope that gives you a quick sense of Innova. But before we dig into the design of the model specifically, I want to also take a step back and build off of where Carlos had started. Carlos showed us some of the outsides of school buildings. I thought I'd show you inside. This is a typical government school in Peru. There's a kind of predominant teaching methodology still, where a teacher is in the front of the room saying things, and a student is writing in their notebook the things that a teacher is saying. So it's rote learning, that's transcripts. And when a kid comes home from school and the parent sees the notebook full, they have that warm flutter in their heart that learning has happened, right? Whereas we might walk past a group of kids playing and doing projects and have that warm flutter in our heart that learning is happening. In Peru, parents expect to see that notebook full of words. And when we talk to parents and kids about this, one of the things that we learned, I mentioned in the video, that kids really wanted their imaginations engaged. This image here shows one kid who shared with us the old notebooks from classrooms where when pages weren't filled in, he went back and did drawings, right? He was craving, activating a different side of him. And so he showed us his kind of secret old notebooks. Also, I think you can understand that given the state of the country's education system that Carlos shared, teachers in this system aren't graduating from schools that have helped them be really prepared to be great teachers. And so not only is there an old methodology, but there's probably not a readiness for the kinds of things that we would expect to have an international quality education. But one of the things that we learned in talking with teachers is how much they wanted to be part of the change that's happening in the country. They didn't want to just read scripts. They didn't want to be told what to do. They wanted to be creatively engaged as well. And of course, parents. Parents really wanted a better future for their kids, but a lot of them didn't know what that looks like in terms of a school choice. And so there was a lot of aspiration. They knew what the fancy private schools look like, but they really didn't know what that meant for the kind of experience they could choose for their children. So that's just a little bit about the context. What that meant was that we had to design a system that would meet not only the goals of the quality standards, the goals of the financial standards, but also the human goals of the people in the system. And so we had to holistically design this from the ground up. Everything from the mission of the schools to the pedagogy to the curriculum, and how that relates to the school building, how that relates to the tools that underlie the system so they could benefit from economies of scale being a network, and how that translated into even the financial and operational models. Everything was thought about from scratch, given the context that they're in. So what does that translate into? That translated into a kind of an innovative pedagogical model that you saw in the video about these two different learning formats, group learning and solo learning. And this image here is when they're in the solo learning mode. And in the last slide kind of showed this like integrated design. Well, this solo learning mode actually happens when a classroom, there's a wall between two classrooms that then open up. And so it doubles the number of kids that are in a room, but allows the teacher to be really fluid, and kids get to some variety in the day. And they're using the best of the international tools available, like Khan Academy, to help them acquire kind of basic knowledge about subject matter, but also really what it means to be self-directed around learning, which obviously is not a priority in the rest of the system. We also took an approach of recognizing that it's not just students that are learners in this system, but it's teachers that are learners too. We had to support teachers to not just be the ones executing on this vision, but to be the creative force that creates it every single day. And so part of that was structuring, how do we take a really constructivist, project-based learning approach that we all know and love that's not common in this place. How do we codify that in a way so that teachers who don't have a lot of prior knowledge can actually teach in this way? And so we, we created something called the Teacher Resource Center, which is a database of lessons. And once we came up with this concept, I think we hired 54 teachers to pre-author about 18,000 lesson plans, not so that teachers were reading scripts, but so that they had the basis of a beginning of lessons that they could run. And they were allowed to change some of it. And if they change some of it, they can upload that back into the system. And then there are coaches that can see what they're doing and see who's really strong and see who needs support. But also, Jorge, you guys, you're hiring an enormous number of teachers to be able to fulfill on these schools. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it means to hire so many teachers and train them?
Yes, sure. In average, we are recruiting 800 teachers every year. And for each 12 applicants, we hire only one. It means that every year we are processing more than 10,000 applicants. And this is a big job. For that, this year, we are starting to use Watson, the super IBA computers, in order that the computer help us in order to looking for some deep skills that the teacher needs in order to be a good teachers. And we are starting this year, and I hope maybe in the next opportunity I will tell you
maybe
what happened. Yes, maybe next conference.
Yeah, how to use Watson to recruit teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you get a sense of teachers as learners, but also machines as learners. I feel like Innova keeps expanding. Yeah. Another important component we keep mentioning is that kids really want their imaginations engaged. At the same time, part of Innova Schools' hope is to produce future leaders of the country in all areas, in business and in government. And so how do we help kids who may not in their homes or may not in other schools have the confidence to be leading, to be creating? And so we've created an innovation program that's a part of Innova Schools. Every year, let's see, you had about 17,000 students doing this last year?
Almost 1,000,
yeah.
10,000.
Yeah, amazing. And Carlos, do you want to talk just a little bit about what you see in this?
Well, in the earlier slides, I showed all the kind of abundance that Peru has in terms of natural resources, the things that we were given. But if we want to participate in the knowledge economy, I think we have to create all sorts of new things. And if you look at statistics, it's kind of confirmed that the Peruvians aren't creative. Not because they're not born creative, it's just something that we haven't really fostered as a country. We are near the bottom in patents per capita and all the different variables. So given that we partner with IDEO, where design thinking actually comes from, we decided to have the innovation program, which is 1 week a year, starting in, I think, in 4th grade, all the way through, where kids are actually tackling problems in their communities. It could be things like how to improve parking around the school, to how to eat healthier, how to recycle, and it's a really fun week to see all the creativity of all these kids. So imagine if from 4th grade on, every year, you're kind of working on design thinking concepts and trying to solve problems. We hope that by the time they graduate, these kids will be just fantastic and we'll be able to create a great future for our country.
Yeah, just think of this as like the reinvented science fair, that every year these kids can be innovating in their communities. So one more thing I wanted to share with you about the model. This is what the buildings look like. And remember, the tuition price point that Carlos mentioned is $100 to $150 per month. One of the things when we were working on this, the business model was a fully integrated part of the design process, not just in terms of all that we could dream about and how do we pay for it, which is, I think, the way we often think in schools. We want everything for kids. Shoot, how do we pay for it? The way that we looked at this is we said, how can we use the business constraints as a lever for creativity? And actually, one of the areas was construction. We had to really think creatively about the cost of construction. At the same time, we knew that it was important for parents to feel really good about the choice that they're making about where they send their kids to school. They wished to be sending their kids to the fancy private schools. And that message was a way that you could set your kid up for success. And so we had a priority throughout the project to make sure that we could help parents feel proud when they drop their kids off at school every day. And I also just want to nod to this image on the right here, because this was a huge learning for me. The kids that are working outside, when my team was working on a lot of the space design stuff, they kept coming back with this, the weather's so great in Lima, let's have outdoor learning spaces, and there's a limit to how tall you can build, so after 3 stories we can't use so much of the space. Why don't we use the roofs? And I was like, all right guys, if that's what you're really excited about, whatever. And so they were really obsessed with this idea of these like rooftop working spaces. And it's fun, and I just kind of kept laying it down. And it's so funny because when you go into these schools now, it looks like that. Kids, they look like they're in college. They're self-directed around their learning. They're finding a place to do it. They're really comfortable working with each other. They've become comfortable working with the technology. And so it's, I think, been pretty inspiring to see those rooftop spaces actually really activated and alive. So major lesson for me. Okay, and so just to close this section, we mentioned in the video about some of the academic results that are happening, but I think actually this is a pretty exciting thing that you've just started to have some graduates. And Jorge, do you want to talk about this 86%, what that number is?
Yeah, in our country, our Ministry of Education take only a national test in 2nd grade in the last 15 years. And recently, we started with 4th grade and 8th grade, and no more. And our results in our school are very good, but the most important for us is that when our students are finishing their studies, they are continued on the higher education. And 86% of them are studying in different universities, and they are demanding careers. For example, 28% of our students are following engineering careers, okay? And 11% is following a business career. And this driver is very, very important for us because in our market, the parents demand that their kids studied at the university.
So that's a kind of overview of the model. We thought it might be nice to share with you more about the journey that Jorge in particular has gone on in creating these schools. Jorge, you want to?
Yeah. We have a video. Con este.
Tú no puedes vivir en un país en el cual tienes al 5% de la población que tiene acceso a una educación de calidad y el resto no. Cuando ya yo había terminado mis estudios en la universidad y estaba trabajando, tuve que viajar a las escuelas rurales en el Perú. No tenían los servicios mínimos básicos y me convencí de que este país no es sostenible en el largo plazo si no se hace algo radical en el tema educativo. Y fue a los 45 años cuando me pregunté dónde quiero estar a los 60 y la respuesta fue educación. Me puse a estudiar sistemas educativos, viajé a ver experiencias exitosas y un año después me lancé a comprar un terreno y fue realmente bastante duro al principio. No tenía yo forma de financiarme y tuve que recurrir a mis activos personales para poder obtener un préstamo. Cuando tú no tienes alumnos, no tienes infraestructura terminada, no tienes quien te recomiende, es bien difícil que un padre de familia apueste. Y después de casi un año logramos convencer a 100 y arrancamos el colegio con 130 alumnos. El sistema que habíamos planteado tuvo muy buena acogida. Y un día recibo una llamada de Interbank y me dicen que, ¿sabes qué? Nos ha gustado el proyecto, queremos entrar en educación y queremos invertir en el proyecto.
For the first time in our search of what to do in this sector, we thought we found the hero.
Él me preguntaba y me decía, ¿cuántos colegios quieres hacer? Yo le decía 15. Y él me dijo, ¿por qué no 100? Hoy tenemos 41 colegios y más de 30.000 alumnos estudiando. Yo creo que vamos a hacer de todas maneras más de 100 colegios. Y con colegios que son grandes espacios de aprendizaje, donde los alumnos puedan liberar su energía, su creatividad y trabajar en base a proyectos con mucha tecnología, operando no solamente en el Perú, sino también en otros países de América Latina.
Well, my journey began when I had the opportunity to know the reality of our education in Peru. And was clear for me that my country was not going to be sustainable in the long term if we don't change our educational system. Because we can't live in a country in which the gap between the people who have access to a good education and those who don't have is so big. And for many times, I was thinking, how can I help to my country to improve our educational system? And I was involved in different educational projects, basically in the rural areas. And when I was 45 years old, I decided to quit my job as a general manager in a logistics company where I had been working for more than 20 years and start my own project. And in 2006, I started with my first school by the name San Felipe Neri. And at the beginning, it was really hard to convince the parents that they take their kids to my schools because they didn't know me. They told me that you are not a teacher, you are not an educator, you had not successful students, you had nothing to show them. And it was really hard, but little by little, step by step, I convinced some of them and started my first school with 130 students. And 1 year later, we had 300, and then started with my second school, and then with the third. And I had to invest all my money, including some family assets, as security to apply for a loan. But in 2010, Intercorp proposed me to join this journey. And at the beginning, I didn't understand why a big group that are involved in banking, insurance company, shopping malls, a movie theater, among others, would want to invest in education. And I had a meeting with Carlos, and we were discussing about the education in Peru. And during this conversation, I felt that he had a real interest in order to make something important in education. And it was after this meeting when I decided to join with them. And in that time, we had 3 schools, but we were aware that our educational model had not a world-class level. And our objective by 2021 is that our school be considered like one of the most important experience in the world. Our dream is that our school be considered like one of the best educational experience in the world, not in Peru, not in Latin America. I am talking about the whole world. And at that time too, was necessary to make some decisions, but additionally, we had several questions. For example, what should we teach our students? Because our responsibility as educators is to prepare these students in order that they be successful in the world where they will live, which is not the world where we are living now. What should we do in order to capture the attention of the students? Because today they like to do 2 or 3 things at the same time. However, we want the student be in the classroom paying attention to a person who in their mind is boring. How should we do in order to respect the individual learning pace of the students? But the most important question was, how can we build 100 schools in 15 years, providing a very high level of education, like in the best school in the world, making them affordable to the emerging middle class in our country, and sustainable and profitable at the same time. I remember that someday Carlos told me, I need to do something different. I don't know what, but I know who can help us. So we went to San Francisco to meet with IDEO. And we decided to work with them in order to develop a model which is affordable, scalable, high quality, and profitable. And I would say that it was not easy. not by IDEO, by us, by our people. Because in education, all people say, no, doesn't work, it's not possible. I remember that every session was difficult. We spent a lot of time in a long meeting with many people discussing many things. At the end, we didn't get anywhere. And sometimes it was necessary for me that I made some academic or educational decisions in order to move on. I know that Carlos and Sandy have many things and many concerns during this process. I don't know if you want to say something, Carlos.
Well, Jorge makes it sound so easy because he says, well, I met Carlos and he convinced me and and we did the schools. It took me 1 year, okay? It was a bunch of sessions, a bunch of things, and once we agreed, the hardest thing was to tell Jorge, I don't really like your schools. I don't want to do your schools. And that's when he kind of worried, was I a used car salesman? I didn't mean to insult the used car salesmen. Anyway, I called IDEO with him, and we came up with these 4 characteristics. But it's very, very tough, and I come from the business side. And these meetings that Jorge is talking about went on forever. Nothing ever got resolved. Everybody knew the answers, but then there was a better answer, and at the end we had to cut the cake a little bit. And if you see some of these pictures, I think there was a transformational moment there. You see Jorge wearing the red wig. That's when everybody let their hair down. That's when we decided, hey, I don't know is not a bad thing to say if we actually don't know, and let's come up with something together. So it was a really, really fun process. And there's one word that I really don't like, which is relaunch. That doesn't mean you can't make mistakes and you get up and you try again. But relaunch to me means that you didn't do your homework at the beginning. And we spent a lot of time, and think about this, the little company that we partnered with Jorge's company, had 1 school, was in the process of building 2 schools. I don't remember the revenues, but it was
$300,000.
$300,000. And not to embarrass Sandy, but we spent more than that on the consulting project. So, what company spends more on a consultant than the revenues? Well, we did, because we wanted to try to get it right. And that was probably...
What consultancy goes on stage with clients who would say that publicly?
Yeah. That's true. But,
and yet, here we are.
And just so you know, we're almost partners for life with IDEO, working on other things with them and some of our other businesses. But anyway, so we tried to avoid that and by spending a lot of time, came up with very, very thick books on how to do this. And honestly, not knowing really what would happen after we built our first school. So it was a fun experience, and we spent time in Silicon Valley. We visited schools everywhere. And I think at the end of these inspirational school visits, the one thought I remember I had is, hey, nobody has this right. Everybody has pieces of it right, but nobody has it right. We have a chance here to do something. And that's what really inspired the entire team. And I remember we used to put up, what would we like to have in 5, 10 years? Well, imagine a headline like this, like that. And I never thought really that would be possible. And it's actually happening because we really put together a fantastic team of people that really care about the outcome of the kids. And the profits is the result of all the good work, not the main motivation.
How many of you in here run schools? You guys mostly, a handful, a couple. Schools are really difficult. They're such complex systems, and what happens is in thinking about anything, you explode just about everything. And everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got an agenda, and all of a sudden to create something as complex as a school, which is a major operation, you have a million frameworks and you have a million ideas about what great could look like. And I know I showed you at the beginning some really beautiful images of what's happening in Innova Schools right now. But there was a time when we went from all that could be to all that should be to then the question of how does that now become real? And I remember a really great moment where we were in stacks and stacks of frameworks and books and papers, which I'm sure many of you know the feeling of, and we're trying to plan and we're trying to think and we're all over the place. And Carlos came in and said, you have to know what the 4 things are, that if you don't get it right, the whole thing won't work. You have to know what the most important things of this model is. And so we had a big discussion about that. We went from complexity into all of the thoughts to the 4 essential components of what makes this model special, both educationally and also for people. And we came to those 4 things that I shared at the beginning, this curricular model, this blended approach of the group and solo learning, the resources for teachers and how we support them and their learning journey, the innovation program, and then the iconic spaces. And this is the best image I can find, sorry, but after that meeting, as we clarified that, we put posters up in the room, we organized every discussion around those 4 anchor areas, basically said, get those right, and everything will flow around it.
And in this journey, it was necessary to create a new culture, a combination of the academic and business culture. In this time, I have learned that academic means long process, long-term goals. Everything is slow and based on relationship. In the business culture, everything is today, right now. It's about the goals, accountability, and based on transactions. And our question was, how can we build a new culture that takes the best of the business and academic culture? This is what we are doing, and it is not easy. We have been working on that for a long time, and I would say that our job is not over. Another challenge was the teachers. Because we work with the average Peruvian teacher, and in general terms, the level of the teacher in Peru and in Latin America is not high. And for that, it was necessary to create a system of teacher training that didn't represent a burden for teachers. Because 86% of our teachers are women. More than 50% are mothers. It means that they are women that every day get up very early in the morning, 5 o'clock, for attending their family, kids, husband, then take a public transportation for 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and are arriving to our school at 7:15 in order to start at 7:30 and work until 3 p.m. And after that, we ask them to go to the corporate university for training. It is impossible. For that, with IDEO, we have developed an ecosystem of teacher training in which each of them are receiving, in average, between 100 and 120 hours in training every year through 4 different types of training. And they can do it from the schools, home, or from their own smartphones. But the real challenge were the parents. Because usually the parents want that their kids learn in the same way that they learn it, by repeating and memorizing. I remember that in this time was very difficult that they understand what we are doing. I remember that the parents told me that we should be more demanding. We should give more homework or take more tests. And it was very, very difficult that they understand our methodology, and we had a lot of work in different things in order that they said that this is the best path to follow for their kids. And we opened the schools so they can go to the school anytime, enter to the classroom. We asked the students to show their parents how they learn. We prepare videos, brochures in order to explain our methodology, and little by little they understood that this is the best way for their kids to learn. At the end, in this journey, I have some lessons. The first is that the biggest barrier for education and innovation is ourselves. Because usually, the educational community feel that nothing is possible. And you must be strong and bold if you want to change education. Second one, this journey never ends. And you need to work every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year. And finally, the team is very important. To have a good qualification is necessary. But the most important for me is when you talk with the people about education, you can see the shines in their eyes. This is a good signal for me.
And now we're going to talk about the division beyond Innova Schools and what we're trying to accomplish in Peru. And we have one last video we want to show you. We realized that this country has been growing for the last 25 years, but then we also realized that if you look at just basic measurements of how education is moving forward, we've been dead last in the PISA ranking for the same period. Obviously, we're not going to have a bright future unless we correct that.
El tema educativo no puede ser un tema solo para educadores o gestores de la educación y tiene que ser visto como sinónimo de desarrollo en realidad.
Today we have 41 schools, about 32,000 kids, growing every year. The results have been very, very encouraging.
Y nuestro gran objetivo es que en el año 2021 los colegios de Innova Schools sean considerados como una de las mejores experiencias educativas en el mundo.
Innova Schools is pretty special right now, but 5 years out I think it'll be even better. As anything that you start from scratch, you learn things, you improve them, and you improve them, and you improve them. And I think that's what's going on right now.
You're going to have many other people hopefully replicate the model of Innova. So Innova's impact won't just be the direct impact on its own students, but on the meta-level impact on students everywhere.
5 or 6 years from now, we'll have 5,000 kids graduating from Innova Schools. So we've chosen a few universities in the US where we'll give full scholarships to the best kids from Innova. I envision a few years from now, Innova, let's say in a country like Colombia or in Ecuador, in some middle-class family, having a discussion of where to send their kids to school. And the mother says, hey, what about that school where the Peruvians are teaching? Imagine that, from being dead last to being now the teachers of our region. Okay, so let me share with you some of the things that we're working on. I remember being at a panel a few years ago and somebody asking, well, what are you doing about the poor kids, the rural part? Obviously, it hurt a little bit because we're doing the emerging middle class, and I think the government has a role to do in a lot in education as well. And we thought, what could we do? And we came up with an idea. Why not reward the brightest kids at public schools and give them a chance to grow even more? So we started a program called Peru Champs, and you can go to the webpage peruchamps.org, where we put up some of the funds, we do some crowdsourcing, and we select kids based on not just their grades, but we want them to be, we want kids also that want to be good at art or at sports or whatever talent they want to pursue in life. And today we have about 2,100 kids that go to Innova Schools from the Peru Champs program. It's incredible how these kids are flourishing. I'll give you a quick example of one kid. He was about 9 years old. He was a very, very good student at his public school. And he's a little chubby and he was getting bullied. So his father was a security guy earning minimum wage, had a one-room home in the outskirts of Lima. And what this kid decided to do is not to take a shower, so that he'd smell so bad that the kids wouldn't get near him. We found him at one of these searches that we did. He's been at Innova for 3 years. He's near the top of his class. He's showering every morning. He's doing very, very well. He's a great example for other kids. Another Peru champ I think last year, received an award from the Queen of England. So these are just amazing kids that we give them a 75% scholarship, and we feel it's important that they pay the 25% so that they feel that they have to have a little bit of sacrifice, but that's $1 a day. So it's something that they can come up with. So that's what we're doing kind of with the bright kids that are in the very low income areas. In the middle, we're focusing on Innova Schools, where we have 8.2 million K through 12 kids in Peru, and the ones that we feel can have parents who can afford sending them to schools like Innova, maybe it's 1.5 million. So that's kind of our target there. And then for the higher end, we've recently been involved in buying institutes and universities so we can continue the process. And we started a scholarship program called University Champs. These are kids that right now are from Peru. Eventually, perhaps most of them will be from Innova, that are very, very, very good, very talented, and should and can aspire to study at any of the top universities in the US. So we already have agreements with Harvard, with MIT, with Berkeley, with Dartmouth. The idea is to get to 20 universities. And perhaps in the next 20, 25 years, have 4,000 to 5,000 of these Peruvian kids going abroad. I'm sure some will come back, some will stay. But I think that's the way that we can really help across the board and retrain our population to be ready for the future. Now, we bought this university a couple years ago, and I'm going to be kind to what we bought. We called it a popular university. Okay, it's popular, a lot of kids sign up for it. So I decided, I'm very curious about the businesses we're getting involved in, to take the entrance exam. So I took the entrance exam, and as I was going through it, I said, wow, this is really hard. I just felt kind of down on myself. I had a lot of memorization, dates, and so on. And I said, I don't think I'm going to pass this exam. So I went to the people who gave it and asked them, what's the percentage of people that pass? And the person told me 90%. Now I was feeling really bad. And I said, really, 90% pass this exam? Wow, I must be really outdated. And what about the 10% that don't pass? Oh, they didn't show up. There was no grade. It doesn't matter. If you have a pulse, you get in. And guess what happens to these kids? After 2 terms, they drop out. So it was a for-profit in the worst possible way. And what we did is we bought this university. We changed 98% of the faculty. If you want to, have an experience of dramatic change, try to do one of those. It's totally different. Now kids are getting a real education, and we have a long way to go. But that's one of the things that I think that the private sector needs to do to kind of shake up the industry. We don't pretend to be the saviors and be the only people in Peru that are going to push this forward. But somebody has to kind of take the initial step so that everybody starts comparing and saying, wait a minute, why can't others do the same? And I go back to Machu Picchu, and a few years ago I had a visit from a group from Korea, and I was just wondering in the middle of a small little hiccup that we had in Peru as to why they were visiting us. And the answer for these business guys was because we used to be poorer than you. And that kind of shocked me. I've heard it before, but these Koreans were looking at Peru much better than the Peruvians were. And so we're in a hurry. Got a long way to go. And one of the things we're doing next year is Innova is going to new countries. So we're going to have our first Innova Schools. It's going to be in Mexico. We open up in 2018. And it's going to be an interesting experience. We visited with Jorge many times, and they have similar problems as we have in Peru. And I'd like to just end with a couple of final slides. This is a fellow who made it all possible for me. This is General Velasco from Peru, who in 1968 led a military coup and took out our democratically elected leaders, and the military stayed in power for 12 years. That forced my family to leave Peru and resettle in the United States. And I was very lucky that they resettled in California. and a very good public school system around the Bay Area. I ended up going there and then to Berkeley. And I wonder what my life would have been if I didn't have that opportunity. And that's a challenge that I think, excuse me, faces many Peruvians, and we want to change that. So we don't think Peruvian kids should leave the country to get a good education. I think they should do it in Peru. And I think education is also at the end pride. And we always talk in our group about kind of a few things that are important. But you know, the first thing is to really have a big idea. You know, think big, whether it's your school, maybe it's your district, and it's your county, it's your state, the country, you know, maybe the world. Then surround yourself with the best possible people you can. We owe a lot to some educators from Berkeley, some people from the Ontario Principals Council, IDEO, Jorge. It's been a great effort of people pitching in. And then, you know, kind of the last is hard work. There's no substitute for hard work. So thank you very much for listening to our story, and I hope someday you visit us in Peru.